Move words. Tonight I'm gonna show you how to turn plastic into raw steel. No useless intro, just straight to the point. We built this battering ram on tracks in the last video, slapped on all the textures, and now it's time for a thick coat of VMS dark grey primer. This color isn't random. Dark brown or dark grey undercoats are the way to go if you want that real steel look. Now let's quickly boost it with some Tamiya paints. The first pass with German grey is just for good measure. We all love that silky smooth primer finish, but for this we need a dead flat surface. Since this layer is our base for rust effects, red-brown is a must too. Here we can start adding quick variation between panels, changing opacity, coverage, leaving some more grey, some more brown, you know how it goes. But this alone wouldn't cut it. Let's spice things up with some rust-colored AK relics. This part's fun because it's fast. Just speckle them randomly, no need for precision. We want texture and variety, and we want it fast. In other words, don't waste your time where you don't have to, but also make it count when you do. Finally, a quick airbrush pass tones down the rust and brings back some lost variation. Honestly, the hardest part here is cleaning the airbrush. The unsung hero of this anime is the chipping medium from VMS. Grab it per the links in the description. It's an absolute S-tier potion and you only need one thin layer. The mill scale on our steel coffin comes from mixing these Tamiya paints. Just mix them randomly for each panel and the variation will be endless. Raw steel, especially mill scale, isn't just random, it sometimes creates patterns. We'll get to those in a sec, but for now, this quick zebra effect will do. I already praised the god level chipping power of the VMS fluid in my T26 video, saying it would be perfect for rusty finishes. Back then, I had no clue I'd be painting this tank. Coincidence? Definitely. But I've been using it for years, so there's that. After we finish tickling the model with a brush, we can add those patterns I mentioned. I'm no Iron Man, so I don't know exactly how they form, but I saw them in my references. I guess they are created during storage, or some might come from the hot rolling process itself. After all, mill scale is basically a hard, flaky layer of iron oxides that forms during hot rolling, and has that bluish grey color. The other MVP with not enough credit here is the VMS flat varnish, which I'll use to seal every chipping layer. And to make these clips more confusing, now I'm spraying another coat of chipping fluid on top of the dried flat varnish. For rust effects, this is all you need. Well, for the airbrush part anyway. If you want bright and vivid rust tones, start with the yellow and just a tiny bit of hull red. Now, painting rust on raw steel isn't like painting a corroded wreck that's been sitting outside for a decade. You see, those dark rusty chips aren't technically chips. It's dark corroded metal under the mill scale, so yeah, technically they are chips. But what I'm trying to say is that we don't have to focus the rust solely on the chips. Not at all. We can be more generous with it. Even if you overdo it, the chipping fluid has your back. Right now, the goal is just to lay down a basic rust foundation. Kind of like pre-dusting with earth tones, but in this case, we're using rust tones. So it's technically pre-rusting. Haha, new technique discovered. Even if it doesn't look perfect yet, don't worry. We still have tons of effects coming later. For example, I thought the contrast looked a bit harsh, so I went over everything with a more diluted mix of the same color, which softened the effect and gave it a bit more opacity. Once I was happy with it, I sealed it again with VMS flat varnish. The masking tape can go now as well, and the adjacent roof plate should give you a good taste of what's coming next. Our next tool is oil, and these 4 Upsilon colors will be more than enough. Literally, because I pretty much only used oxide patina and yellow. Even if they've been sitting on this dry palette for a few days, just poke them with a needle and they're good as new. One of the perks of filming multiple plates on this model is that I can show you different approaches, because, spoiler alert, there's no single correct way to do this stuff. It really depends on what effect you're going for. I like to pretty much let the surface guide the process. On this panel, I had some lighter orange pre-rusting underneath, so I went with a darker rust tone to add depth. On the neighboring plate, it was the opposite. Darker rust base, so I followed with lighter tones. It's all about contrast and layering. And I can't stress this enough. Reference images are your best friend here. Not just for color variation between plates, but for the actual shape, intensity, and layout of the rust effects. But hey, we're still just warming up with the oils. The real magic, that's coming with acrylics. Again, you don't need a whole paint rack for this. To enhance the mill scale, I only used medium gray, but the exact tone really depends on your base coat. If your mill scale came out darker from the airbrush, you'll want to grab a slightly darker acrylic for the task. Rust-wise, it's the same story. These three will carry you through. Once again, what we do with them depends entirely on the texture. In this case, I started by bringing back those dark scratches. I used heavily diluted paint and built them up slowly in a few passes. Hot take alert, speckling with acrylics is actually more powerful than oils. I mean, it depends on the situation, obviously, but if you want super fine, sharp specks, acrylics wipe the floor with oils. And on this type of surfaces, trust me, you'll be speckling a lot. My personal favorite part of this whole step, painting with light orange tones. It's the complete opposite of the dark scratches. Now we're enhancing the light, fresh rust stains. That means you can load up the mix with yellow if you want. I think it's fun because it's a bit trickier. It takes a bit of practice and steady hand, and the challenge itself makes it enjoyable. So that's the first plate done. The other one was painted with the same approach, just different mixes and different textures to play with. Let's move on and try something else on the back. Remember how I said that mill scale has a bluish color? Well, what if I mixed it just from blue and white? Let's find out how it'll look at the end. Also, check out how the rough armor texture from the previous video is working with the chipping. I wasn't kidding when I said smooth surfaces are a one-way ticket to Sad Town. Don't get lost in the layers now. Each chipping layer is always sealed with flat varnish from VMS, and then another layer of chipping fluid is applied. I'm just not focused on the technicalities anymore, just the creative process. This section was actually inspired by a steel plate I found on AliExpress of all places. I liked how it was almost completely covered in this subtle, dark, rusty powder with chill vibes. Doing the chipping first and then adjusting it with a more diluted paint mix is an absolute power move. It's quick, it works, and it looks awesome. Here I actually went through 3 layers of chipping, because I wanted to add a few spots of fresh orange rust. Honestly, it would be stupid, endless fun if I didn't have to clean the airbrush every single time. And a cool trick about doing this before oils is that the oil effects can tone everything down just a notch, while still adding more color and variety. This plate is where I used all the oil colors I showed you before. And I think I finally found the right words. Speckling with diluted oils is like breaking up smooth gradients with a bit of visual grain. But with acrylics, it's all about adding that faint, almost invisible surface texture. Honestly, you could probably fake most of these effects with just acrylics, but when you're working on something this massive, mixed media just makes life easier. Another little detail I noticed in my references are these markings with the dimensions of the plate. I don't know if they were used in Germany back in the day, probably not, but I think they look cool. So that's the back plate done with a totally different finish. Let's try the same idea one more time, this time on the side. And let's keep it casual for a moment and let the moving pictures carry some of the weight while we talk the talk. Painting each plate from start to finish might not be the fastest approach, but in my opinion, it's the best one. Sure, constantly cleaning the airbrush, swapping brushes, switching between paints and mediums. Yeah, doing each step across the whole model would be quicker. But that's where repetition creeps in. Same mixes, same patterns, same textures. Even the masking tape obscuring our view of the adjacent plates helps to keep things more unpredictable, which is exactly what we need, because this isn't some ancient rust bucket from a scrapyard. It's a newly built metal coffin, welded together from plates that were born under different conditions before ending up here. Also, I would like to smoothly plug a bit of ad time here, but I won't try to sell you a mobile game. I already mentioned the VMS shipping fluid and flat varnish, which were essential in this entire process. I have a great relationship with VMS, and if you'd like to try these yourself, getting them through the links below will help me out. Also, you must have noticed that all of the fine effects are created with AK paints, in this case oils and acrylics, or as I like to call them, AK relics. I'm supported by AK, and I have an actual affiliate link in the video description, so each visit and purchase through that link helps me out. Not to mention, I have discount codes for both brands down as well. Also, I have my own webpage with a gallery of my models. I decided to start selling my work, so if you're interested, go check it out, because most of the good stuff is already gone, and this model will be available for purchase as well. And lastly, I have my own merch developed with Plastic Invasion. Right now we have t-shirts with 2 designs, but we're already cooking something more useful for our modeling needs. Oh, and just a final small mention, I also have my own kit with RT diorama. Anyway, that was fun, right? Ad reads were never this educational before. Final thing, and I'm done with the steel plates. On the front, I tried to speed things up and painted both of them at once, which was no good. But I also wanted to show you that you can use white, blue and black oils to enhance the mill scale. Once they dry, they become rock hard and you can proceed with the remaining effects like it's nothing. Let's quickly finish things off with the small details. Painting these with the same methods would be a waste of time and talent, so let's keep it simple and paint them with a brush and a piece of sponge for that subtle random texture. A quick rust wash from oils is all they need. Or you can combine it with diluted acrylics as well, it's all up to you. Okay, that's the end of our steel texturing arc. In general, one plate took me one afternoon to paint from start to finish, and I even repainted the right hand side because I just didn't like it. But we're not even close to the finish line, my friends. I had these old Wilder transfers lying around for years. The last and only time I used them was on my mouse, and this build felt like the perfect excuse to bring them out again. I'm pretty sure they're long out of production by now, but luckily, most factory markings like these can be replicated with a brush. Still, it just felt like a waste not to use them while I had the chance. They add a nice contrast to the other markings. I went balls to the wall here, marking out the position of every single detail that was welded onto the main shell. It's something you'll often find on the real thing, a subtle touch, but very eye-catching once it's there. The rest of the numbers were painted by hand in a similar way. I combined the plate dimensions with a bunch of random digits I made up on the spot. They don't really mean anything here, but they're a common sight on factory for steel plates, so I didn't want to miss that opportunity either. One neat trick. If you moisten the dried paint with a bit of tap water and gently rub it with a toothpick, it creates that worn, chalk-like finish. Dusty, translucent, scribbled in a hurry. After that little detour, it's time to cut back to our scheduled steel puns and tackle those flame cut edges we crafted in the previous video. I could only find references from laser cutting, because apparently nobody uses flame anymore, thanks modern industry, but it was still enough to spot some cool effects. Once I broke it all down into imaginary painting steps, the most logical starting point was a quick pass of German grey sprayed around each edge. I know it looks awful at first, but we have to trust the process. The next step is where it starts making sense. A bright, almost white layer sprayed directly along the edge while keeping the dark halo visible. I don't know if the discoloration is just temporary before rust sets in, but it looks cool, so it's going on the model. Speaking of rust, a quick wash with oil paints helps blend everything with the surrounding texture while still letting those cuts pop. To give it an extra punch, I followed up with some diluted white AK relics and a fine brush along the most exposed areas. We'll finish these later when we hit the edges with graphite. Well, that escalated quickly. One effect down, and now it's time to again temporarily ruin our hard work with another sloppy move. For the weld beads, I mixed a bit of black into German grey and gave them the exact same airbrush treatment. For reference, I went straight to the source. Messy welds shared by amateur welders on Reddit. It's a gold mine if you want realism that's a little rough around the edges. Here's what I noticed. The areas around the welds get blackened by heat, just like with the flame cuts. But there's more to it. Some of them also have this distinctive sand-colored scorching right next to the weld line. The size and intensity of the discoloration depends on how sloppy or aggressive the weld was, which is perfect for our purposes, obviously, because we're trying to spark as much visual interest as possible. Next is an almost invisible yet important step, painting the weld beads with natural steel acrylic. It's almost impossible to see it on the sand-colored background, but again, trust the process. At this point, I understood that heat is always followed with corrosion, so another rust wash was in order. Just be careful with it and don't cover up the transitions between the dark and sandy scorch marks. Finally, we pick out the weld texture using pure silver acrylic. The rust wash remains in the crevices, and the silver paint acts as a highlight, bringing out the texture of that molten welding rot and giving the welds that fresh, shiny look which contrasts beautifully with the raw steel around it. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the heavy metal tutorial, my friends, but steel always attracts dirt thanks to the dead flat texture of the rust. But before we proceed to that, let's quickly paint the tank hull. And I mean really quickly. I don't want to pull you away from the main topic. The Porsche Tiger hull is just a supporting character in this anime, and only bits of it will be visible in the final model. So I gave it a quick coat of German yellow, followed by a few layers of oil paint washes. First a heavily diluted global wash, then a darker, tighter pin wash to pick out the details. Now, I could have left the hull looking all factory fresh, like this. It was already looking pretty convincing. But I remembered a chat I once had with the OG of raw steel and oxide primer himself, Adam Wilder. He always said that he likes to paint these things, in his words, as if they drove them around. So I figured, why not make this one look like it saw some action as a training vehicle in tank driving school? Sure, German grey would make more sense for that, but yellow contrasts way better with the steel, so let's just pretend it got a fresh coat of paint and a set of updated tracks from the elephant while they were at it. And honestly, the more I looked at it, the more I thought this plain, no frills dark yellow tank, painted with just the basics and no fancy shading, actually looked not boring at all. What do you think? While I was at it, I figured the model could use a small detail to break up the monotony. So I threw together a towing cable from some leftover parts, 3D printed a pair of Tiger toe shackles, and tucked the whole thing under the ram at the front of the tank, right where it would have been easy to reach. With the hole wrapped up, I slapped the ram back on one more final time, and we can now continue the tutorial with Steel Resolve. And that means dust effects. Because let's face it, rust and dust go together like coffee and White Monster. But on this kind of finish, we need to keep it under control. The surface is completely matte, so the paints will grip much better than they would on a glossy one. That's why I think gouache is the perfect choice here. It dries completely matte every time, but you can always reactivate or remove it if you go too far. If you're not on the gouache train yet, although you should be, linked down below, you can still use oils or enamels. Just start small and build them up gradually. And the goal here isn't to bury all these gritty metal textures under a blanket of dust. Case in point, I found my first pass to be dull, so I turned the flat brush sideways and added some vertical streaks to simulate rain marks. Whether or not the ram was actually left outside is not my point here. It just adds visual interest, and that's what matters. As with rust or steel, the best dust effects come from mixing mediums. So I followed up with some enamel speckling to introduce subtle, irregular texture and some more opacity. And if any of it looks too bold or out of scale, just wipe it away with enamel thinner. I also spotted some dark grime stains in my references. Not like impurities in the metal, but something that's, on the plate, and it's sticky and horrible. I didn't go overboard with these because, sure, on one hand, they could be on every panel and still look totally realistic, but at that point, you'd lose all the nuance. I also placed them near the running gear to visually connect the dusty steel plates with the dirty lower hull. Not to say the ram itself was driven around, but visually it clicks together a lot better. And now the finishing step, the icing on the iron cake, graphite. Not great for moderating nuclear reactors, but absolutely god level for polished steel effects. And if there's one paint job where it's not just recommended but basically your sworn duty, it's raw steel. Sure, you could leave it as it is, or go full Warhammer and fake the shine with grays, whites or even metallic paints, but honestly, I haven't seen anything that captures the dark sheen of heavy metal quite like a pencil. This is also a textbook example of how the construction phase influences the paint job. If I didn't bother texturing those flame cuts, this part wouldn't even exist. I just hit a few panel edges and call it a day. So yeah, spending the extra time on construction always pays off. And actually I think that'll do, my friends. The last time I painted something in this raw, unpainted steel finish was about half my life ago, so naturally, getting this model done makes me an expert on the topic. And that's exactly why I made this tutorial. It's funny how last summer's project was a factory fresh Ferdinand in oxide primer, and this time around we've got another Porsche hull, just with the giant battering ram bolted on top and not even in the oxide primer stage. That's actually why this one won't be getting a diorama or even a small vignette, because I already did the factory floor thing and there's only so many oil stains and wooden crates I can paint before becoming completely irrelevant. Instead, I'll move on to a new project, a full-blown diorama with a building and not one but two vehicles in the scene. You'll see. So anyway, thank you for watching. Seriously, if you made it all the way to the end, that means a lot, and it's an absolute honor for me. I wouldn't be able to do this full time without my patrons. They keep the lights on and the paints flowing, and if you're one of them, thank you from the bottom of my heart. If I didn't have such a great Patreon community, I wouldn't have a steady income anymore. I post regular updates there, share work in progress photos, thoughts from the bench, and we keep in touch through DMs, comments, emails, whatever works for us. Top tier patrons get early access to all videos, completely ad-free, and they stay there forever, perfect for rewatching when you're assembling tracks for your next tank. Plus, there are bonus extras like 3D printable parts for your own projects, reference photos from real-world locations, and these include nature, old buildings, and even sometimes an old vehicle. And last but not least, these high-res studio shots of my models that show way more detail than any video could ever capture. Any kind of support is appreciated, but never expects it. This project felt like it took a lifetime, but looking at the calendar, I started on May 23rd and wrapped it up on June 26th. So I guess that's not too bad for a full 1/35 build with a finish this complex. So, what do you think? Would you try something like this yourself? Let me know in the comments, and remember, build your models, don't just hoard them. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!